Thank you all so much for being here today for Righteous Mind, chapters 1 and 2, looking at the development of morality and then some intuition versus reasoning, or maybe not versus is the right wording. But Bruce, thank you again so much for just doing this journey with all of us. And
let me tell you what we're going to do today. I want to do a brief moment of celebration. Part of what we ended on with our first conversation was I said, let me just remind us all that everything we're discussing here does not work on social media, particularly Facebook, Twitter. You can't take a complex, nuanced morality concept and in an angry debate with somebody engage and escalate and call them names or whatever. None of that's going to take us in any healthy place of building bridges, growing understanding, appreciating each other, and growing in respect and the ability to dialogue and influence each other as a result of respectful dialogue. So Cody and I are friends on Facebook, and there was a moment this week when Cody made an intentional decision to step back from a potential argument that he could have gotten into. And I just said, Cody, would you share more about that? Because I see that as a great example of what we're all trying to do. How do we get our minds connected and our reasoning involved instead of a quick knee-jerk reaction that doesn't take us to helpful places? So tell us about that experience, Cody.
Yeah, it was just, I saw somebody, I forget what it was. I think it was something about like billionaires giving away money or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was something that I was like, I don't really think you're thinking about it all the way through. And I was ready to say something about it. And then I just decided not to. And I was like, I'm going to keep scrolling. Like, it's not going to be worth it. And I'm not even like really great friends with this person. It's somebody from high school that I haven't talked to in a while. Like, what good is it going to do to jump in on his comments and try to correct his opinion? And so what I did instead is I was like, you know what? Well, I'm going to trade correcting someone's opinion for connection with someone else. And so I went and I texted a friend of mine, a different friend that I hadn't talked to in a while, that I just popped in my head, and I thought I would reach out. And I have done that similar thing with whoever I saw post. I've seen really good friends of mine post some like crazy things, and rather than reaching out to them about that crazy thing, I just say, you know what, I'm going to reach out to them and ask them how they're doing, and just be like, I haven't talked to you in a long time. So different end result, but same idea of trading correcting opinions for connecting with someone. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, and I don't always succeed.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. I think that's exactly what we're all working towards. Some of it is almost like developing the discipline of self-control. Before I open my mouth, first, is it true? Am I speaking truth, or am I putting my own spin on it to make my point or whatever? But secondly, will it build the other person up? Is this helpful at all? Why would I need to say this? And if we can learn to slow ourselves down and ask ourselves the question, am I speaking truth, first of all? And secondly, am I building up? Am I saying something that's going to make their life better? Or am I moving toward an argument? Am I moving toward defensiveness? I think I need to correct them and tell them how they're wrong. That's part of what this book is about, is when we talk about morality, boy, a whole bunch of stuff stirs up inside us. And there's some weird thing that happens that we feel the need to say, no, I'm right and you're wrong. And I need to show you how wrong you are. And that's never going to get us to a good place. So do I need to say this at all? Is this helpful? Is this truthful? Will this take us to a bridge that's going to build our relationship or not? So Cody, I saw that post and I love that. Here's one of the things we're doing, and I'm going to try to be intentional about this, is this is clearly not written by a Christian. I think he's an atheist. I think he's pretty liberal, on the liberal end of the spectrum, the further you go into some of his writing and into his book. But the reason I recommended it, and Lisa suggested it, and others of us that have read it before said, this is worth Christians engaging, is that it resonates with Scripture. It resonates with truth that we find in Scripture. So for this afternoon, I'm going to read a passage from Romans chapter 7 to start us off that introduces chapters 1 and 2, where he's wrestling with what happens in human beings that we can espouse our morality, we can believe what is right and true, and yet our own lives don't measure up to what the very things that we agree with and that we believe in our lives. So here's the Apostle Paul wrestling with himself, and he says, I do not understand what I do. It's the last part of Romans 7, picking up at verse 15. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate is what I do. If I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law of God is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, it is sin living in me. I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this is the very thing I keep on doing. If I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it. It is sin living in me. And then he goes on to reason about God's law is still good for us. And he finally ends up by saying, I seem to be a prisoner. And he says, I see a law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched person I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? And he wraps it up. Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Now, I think that's what chapters 1 and 2 are about. I think he's making the argument and saying, even when we know what we believe, even when we've sorted out our morality, when we figured out this is right and that is wrong, and just what is weird about us, that's something ancient, something emotional, something irrational. Eventually he gets to the place of calling it something intuitional inside us, still kicks in faster than our own reasoning, and we find ourselves stuck in unproductive things. So having reminded us all, wouldn't it be great if we could all live our lives in a way that before we opened our mouths, we would ask ourselves the question, is this true? And is it going to build up the other person and help this relationship? Wouldn't that be an awesome life to live? And we all know that would be better, and we all fail. We all know that there are triggers that happen, and often with relatives, with somebody, something triggers us, and faster than we can get it under control, we're in reactive mode. And we start saying something that isn't going to build, that isn't going to nurture the relationship, that is going to escalate the problem, all of those dynamics. So I think he's wrestling with that just from a moral, psychological, sociological perspective. And we definitely see it in chapter 1 and 2. So comments about how we kind of frame this within a Christian framework of sin is part of the issue in our lives, even when we know better. Paul says, why do I keep doing the things I promise myself I'm not going to do? Comments or thoughts on that?
That's exactly how I read it when I saw through that. It says, brings back Paul in Romans. It says, I don't do what I want to do. I mean, it's kind of an everlasting theme. But I also think about, reading the book, it using their terms now, the elephant and the rider, and I see the elephant as your survival mechanism, because it can just trigger things so much faster, right? Like he talks about triggering your hormonal responses for things. I mean, it's just a really quick decision, and then trying to override that. So I'd actually even go farther what you said about, wouldn't it be great if we could think before we spoke? It'd also be great if we could think before we acted, because sometimes our actions cause as much damage as our words. And I think they're triggered the same way. We don't always recognize it. And so when I was reading this, when reading Paul, I see, yeah, that's a struggle, that's a struggle, that's a struggle, right? But then reading this, it starts making me think about, wait a minute, I can recognize this. I can start to see when the elephant is in control and doing things in myself or in somebody else. And I think if I can recognize that better, then I think I can trigger responses better. So that's my hope. That's what I got out of this, that I'm looking forward to, is being able to identify it better and then being able to temper that.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that, Tom. Other comments?
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Tom. One of my struggles is that quick response mechanism. And I think the Apostle Paul becomes so much more relatable as a friend and as an advisor when he admits to the frailty of the things that I know I should not do, yet I do them. You know, it feels like he's pulled a page out of my book. So.
Yeah, when we read that, it's easy to say, how did he know me so well? Because all of us have that inner broken, sinful place. I have a friend who used to use the phrase, sin makes us stupid. You know, when we're raising teenage kids and we say, what were you thinking? And the answer is they weren't thinking, because all these pumped up hormones. And it was like, I get it. I mean, we were all at that stage where we just acted first and then later said, why would I do something so stupid? Why did I react that way? So it's good to know even the Apostle Paul wrestled with that same kind of dynamic in his life.
I also loved, well, one, I know in the margin there, I wrote Romans 7 right when I had read it at the beginning of chapter 1, because that inner battle, like we're always walking around with two people in us, right? Like the reasoning one and the emotional one, and the quick response versus the I've analyzed it a bit and I think differently kind of thing. And but one thing I loved about him going to he has a brief little side note about the rider and the elephant. And I grew up in a context, and especially in a church context, where feelings and emotions, like the one part of Paul that he was battling, was constantly being devalued, right? That those aren't real, feelings aren't real. You base on truth, your feelings don't matter, right? That far reasoning side. And I loved how Jonathan Haidt actually said that instead of using a horse as the rider and the horse, he used a rider and an elephant, because not only is the elephant stronger, and we all understand that about our quick responses and emotional responses, but he said the elephant is smarter, and it's actually giving value to another person's quick emotional responses that we would quickly like to call stupid, or we would quickly like to dismiss, right? But there's something in there that's still of value and is strong, but still of value. And that was good. And that actually was opposite of my earliest learnings in Romans 7. Yeah.
Yeah, good insight. Some of us that grew up in the generation that used to explain Christianity using something called the 4 spiritual laws. And part of what they tried to say in the 4 spiritual laws was your emotions are untrustworthy. Don't trust your emotions. All of that is your physical, sinful side of yourself. Just be reasonable and understand God from the neck up. And now we're kind of coming to this realization, like, I think we got off track there. I think Jonathan Haidt is reminding us, own the physicality of our whole body, own the wholeness of who I am, that I am an emotional being, I am a rational being, I am this mixture of all of this together, and let that be honorable to God, and let that be all of this is the image of God, not just my brain is the image of God. So good insight. Janet, you were going to say something.
And I was also, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I listened to your audio from last week, so it's very nice to see everyone's faces now that go with the voices. And I was just going to add, I agree so much with what Tom and Larry and Ryan just said. And I think, too, that there's value in knowing that we make those snap judgments, and that's okay. I think in a time where we're all trying to be sensitive to not judge, we want to pretend that we're not judging at all. Or, you'll hear that phrase, oh, I don't see color. And yes, you do. And I think that it's very important to acknowledge that and to know that that's a part of all of us, and then to move forward with it. And I think that that's where this book can be really helpful.
Yes, totally. Tom, did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to build a little bit more on Ryan's, because I too was really struck by the elephant versus the horse. And in fact, I read that a couple times just to kind of get that. What was he really saying? Yes, an elephant's smarter. Yes, it's bigger, but to kind of get some of those other nuances. But the other one I think I got out of it, which goes back to my earlier statement, was that I think the elephant can be trained. So there's hope. Whereas when I was reading, Paul, when I read, yeah, we're all like this, it's like, well, okay, there's no hope there. The hope is in the salvation and the redemption, not in change. But then reading that with the elephant and then rereading Paul and going, wait a minute, there's also hope to retrain the elephant. And I think that just kind of expanded, my hope vision. So not only now do I want to recognize it in me and recognize it in others, see that I can retrain mine a little bit.
Yeah, I love that insight, because I think that's the joy and the hope of the gospel. Is the gospel is not a story that says you're a total jerk and you're lost and you're sinful all the way through. But hey, have I got good news for you? Jesus loves you anyway, and it's all going to turn out fine. It's like, actually, I have better news than that. The better news is Jesus wants to join up with you and begin a transformation work within you. Jesus doesn't want to just leave you as a selfish jerk that hurts other people around them and makes all these awful choices. And that Jesus wants you to be better than that and wants to team up with you. And that's what salvation involves, is first I receive grace and forgiveness, but then I begin the transformational work of, Lord, make me a better person, make me more like who you are, and what a good life would look like if I lived it the way you would want me to live it. And so I think that the elephant and rider become teammates together, learning from each other. And we don't just leave the elephant to say, just go ahead and do your own instinctual thing. So Paul wrestles with that, but by the time he gets to chapter 8, he starts to say, I think that everything that goes on in life can be redemptive in our lives to transform us and make us into better people. And so by the time he gets to the end of chapter 8, it's like, there's nothing that's going to separate me from the love of God. I have a poem that I want to, Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to respond to what Jana just said about recognizing that we do all do these snap judgments. And what these couple of chapters helped me to have compassion for myself and then hopefully for others, in realizing we have a lot of social constructs that we come from that we're unaware of. That doesn't make us bad people. It just means that we're going to come from a perspective just as everyone else is. And it's not to be judged and not to judge myself and not to judge others, but to have a little bit more compassion and understanding in approaching any kind of conversations.
Yeah, that's huge, Jeannie. And both Jeannie and Jana with that conversation certainly takes me into conversations about racism, about systemic racism, how we've just grown up in a culture where I came from a family that thought calling myself colorblind was a positive thing. Isn't that a good thing? See, I don't even notice race. I don't notice color. It was like, yeah, that's not a good thing. That's a statement of privilege. You're coming out of white privilege and white assumptions. You need to spend some time listening to some other people's stories and all of that. So great example of how we live within social constructs. And we take them for granted. So here's a poem that I love. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's by an author from like 500 years ago, a guy named John Donne. And he's probably most famous for a poem that makes the statement. It says, no man is an island. Each of us is, and so that no man is an island for whom the bell tolls. All of those are quotes out of his poetry. But my favorite poem that he gives is titled, Batter My Heart, Three-Personed God. So it's his prayer to the Trinity, and it goes like this. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. So he's basically saying, I'm tired of you trying to just reason with me and be nice to me and encourage me and help me and all that, because my nature is stronger than that. And then he uses this phrase, I, like a usurped town, to another do, labor to admit you, but to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. So what he says, he's picturing himself as a city that's barricaded against God, and the city walls and the city gates are slammed shut. And he says, can you please batter the gates in? Can you please be more forceful? And then he makes this amazing statement. I thought I could trust my own reason to let you in. But what I've discovered is that's not enough. I need passion. I need you to invade me with grace. I need you. And so he starts using all these kind of images of the whole person rather than just reason. So it's an example of he's wrestling with it 500 years ago, saying, I wish my reason was good enough, but it isn't. I can't get the writer to be able to totally control the elephant. There's something strong in the elephant of who I am and how these things interact. So what I want to suggest that we're wrestling with in these first couple chapters is the whole idea of kind of what makes us moral and righteous thinkers. That we are moral and we hold an attitude towards righteousness. And he goes into an intriguing section where he says there's an important difference between opinions and morals. It's in page 51 and 52. Bottom of page 51, top of page 52, he has a couple paragraphs there where he's talking about the fact that when we begin to talk about morals, we're not just saying what offends us. We're no longer talking about opinions. Now, Jeannie, I'm going to use you as a quick example because you and I have both heard people who have musical opinions, but they don't think they're opinions. They think they're making a moral statement. I've heard people actually say stuff like, that's not music. That's not dancing. That's not, and I mean, it's like an elderly generation that genuinely believes organ music is church music. If you bring a guitar or a drum to church, that's not music. This is just a moral statement. You're in the wrong and I'm in the right. And part of what Jonathan Haidt says is that when we're wrestling with moral issues, we're no longer discussing opinions. Part of what I do all the time is I say to people, well, I appreciate your opinion on that. It's just an opinion. I have a different opinion on that, because so often people take opinion realms and they discuss them like it's moral realms of right or wrong. I'll give you a quick example and then I'm just going to open up for conversation. Just 2 hours ago, I'm talking to my 95-year-old father-in-law on the phone, and he still goes into the local zoo and he works as a docent and a greeter, 95 years old, sitting in his little medical scooter, and he's saying good morning to people and greeting them. It's just so darling and all that. But his comment was, some of the clothing the women wear these days, I just can't get over it. I mean, they might as well show off their whole breast. The little tiny tops they're wearing, and they're wearing like bikini bottoms. It looks like underwear. Why would a woman do that? And I said, so it's not your style at all, is it? He's ready to make a moral statement that what they're doing is wrong. And I maneuver the conversation into, boy, sometimes I agree with you, Granddaddy. I get it. That it's not my style at all. I wouldn't want to see my wife dressed in that style. I'm not sure where women are coming from. Or then he got off on men, and then he got off on these torn jeans that people wear around. And why would they wear this raggedy clothing? But I kept moving him into, I appreciate what you're saying. I wouldn't wear that either. I appreciate what you're saying. That's a valid opinion, as long as you don't move it into morality and say, this is right and that is wrong, and therefore I have the right not only to condemn you, but try to get the government and the lawmakers to make that illegal, because you shouldn't be wearing that kind of clothing or whatever it is. So I appreciate Jonathan in his writing of this book saying, boy, we get our opinions and our morals all tangled up with our elephant, and we end up in these hard places of convincing ourselves, but I'm taking a stand for righteousness. That's what the book is about, the righteous mind. Thoughts on that? Opinions versus morality and how we get that all tangled up in our conversations. Other examples that come to your mind.
Bruce, could you help me to, this is going to sound really stupid, but the book is heavy. It's really heavy. And can you just explain, I don't feel like he's ever explained what moral judgments or what morality is. And I think I'm confused. It helped a little bit to hear you talk about your granddaddy and opinion versus morals, but I think I'm confused as to what is a moral statement or thinking versus just an opinion or whatnot. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, let me engage that, because I think, Kelly, you'll find his definition, the closest you'll get to the definition so far in the book is the bottom of page 51 and the top of page 52, where he is making the statement, morality is the belief, not only is this right for me because I have an opinion about it, that it's right for me to wear this kind of clothing, or it's right for me to eat this kind of food. But I actually think that what I believe is right for everybody. It crosses the cultures, it crosses the generations. Other people should follow the same rules I follow. That becomes morality. And morality, because we believe it's right, because we believe it's righteous, and not to do it or to do something different is evil and wrong, morality we want enforced not only on ourselves, but we want it enforced in our society, and we want it enforced in the world. So an easy option, Kelly, would be to say, murder is wrong. I think that's true for everybody. I think it doesn't make a difference whether you're Brazilian or American, whether you're Spanish or you're German. To murder somebody in cold blood is wrong. And I want laws to say it's wrong for anybody. And I want it punished. I want us to be a society of law and order, because that's a moral issue. So that's what he's defining at the bottom of page 51 is morality is, I believe it's right, not just for me, but for everybody. And I so believe it's right that I think it should be enforced for everybody as well. There should be laws to make everybody follow the same set of rules. Is that helpful?
It is. So morality is basically like do not murder, or the things that we feel like do not murder. I get it helps. I'm just trying to grasp when I think what is moral. Is this a moral judgment? Is this a moral statement, or is it emotions or intuition? So I've just been trying to grapple with that.
Yeah, and I think that's good to grapple with. In fact, let's open it up. Other comments about the opinion versus morality and the grappling with this? Glenn.
Some examples of this week that I have heard that I'm trying to wrap my head around and is the canceling of Mr. Potato Head now and canceling of Dr. Seuss from schools. My initial reaction was, you got to be kidding me. But I think as we continue down this journey is, taking the approach of help me understand, that why this is important to some people, because my initial reaction was, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. I think for most of us, it'd be like, what is this one about this time? And yeah, good example. Alyssa, were you going to make an example or a thought?
Yeah, for me, it's been really interesting because I'm taking a class right now on aesthetics, mostly in music. So when you brought up the example of, people getting very impassioned, like, oh, that's not music. We've been doing a lot of reading. We read some David Hume on the standards of taste and stuff, and it's a very interesting parallel. These statements that we think are, so obvious, like obviously a Monet is beautiful. Who would disagree with that? And it doesn't seem like a subjective statement, but when you dig down into it, it's like, well, you know, how do you actually define what makes it beautiful? How do you define what makes something right in the terms of morality? So for me, it's just very interesting to see these parallels between aesthetic judgments and moral judgments and how they can elicit very similar sorts of debates and even vitriol, even for something that seems as, trivial as, whether a piece of music is beautiful or good or not. And it's the same sort of debates that we often have about political or moral things.
Yeah, several of us, when we were on staff at RBCPC, loved to get creative and artistic about things. But what we always knew was our most artistic moments would become our most controversial moments, because some people would say, that was an awesome service. I loved how we combined the art and the music and the experience. And someone else is going to walk out and say, that wasn't worship. What the heck just happened there? And did not resonate. And what I would always try to encourage people to was the opinion. Okay, that didn't connect with you. I get that. That's okay. Not everything connects for everybody. You can have your opinion, but frequently it was communicated in a moral tone that just wasn't worship. That was wrong. I didn't understand why you even used that video. That was so offensive. Or so whenever you move into those realms, opinion and morality get all tangled. And what I think he's telling us is because there's something elephant going on there with us, that then we use the rider of the elephant to convince ourselves that we're right.
And I think we also have a tendency to kind of want to believe that Jeffersonian perspective, or even that Platonic thing where it's like, oh, of course my reason has at least some role in it. We tend to want to give that at least equal footing because we want to believe we're rational beings. I mean, especially in the realm of academia, I want to think that I'm a rational person. I'm not purely driven by my emotions, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that Hume's got a point. I mean, even Jonathan Haidt, is talking about how he's trying to prove this point about Jeffersonian, and he's trying to, make this experiment work to prove his point, when he's trying to get tenure. And I was like, that's a very Humean thing to do. You're disregarding the scientific method to simply make the point you want to make. You're trying to make your evidence match the conclusion you want to get, not having the conclusion match the evidence.
Exactly. And I love the fact that by the end of chapter 2, he reminds us and says, none of us are very good at the self-perception of realizing what we've just done to twist all the information to make it fit our storyline. We all have a story that we've created that makes sense of how the world works, how our life works, what's meaningful. I mean, we are all narrative creators. That's part of who we are as the image of God. And we will take all different data and we will manipulate it and figure it out. And what Jonathan finishes chapter 2 on is he invites us to be social beings, to live our lives in community, which as a Christian, we say, wow, that's where church becomes significant, because I'm not going to see myself doing this. But someone else that I allow into my life, some small group I'm part of, some group of friends that we share faith together, all of those dialogue partners sharing my life in community helps ask the right questions and say, are you sure you're interpreting that correctly? Or I might see that differently than you see it. And then that makes me pause and say, wait, so they see it differently from me? I just assumed I was right on that. And so, yeah, good examples there, Alyssa. Other thoughts or comments from people?
It reminds me of, I was listening to one of the Brene Brown Uncommon Good, or not Uncommon Good, Unlocking Us podcast episodes. And now I don't remember which one it was, who she was talking to, but she said, we like to think of ourselves as rational beings that sometimes feel emotion. And really we are emotional beings who sometimes think, which I was thinking about when he was talking about the elephant and the rider and how those emotions and those feelings, I mean, an elephant is far bigger than a human, and that really all those feelings and all of those gut reactions are so much bigger. And sometimes we remember to think, to guide it.
Yeah, and our thinking is always so much slower, as Tom reminded us earlier. You know, the emotional, intuitive side of our lives is a wonderful thing for survival. If a gunshot goes off, my body's going to duck faster than my brain can even figure out what that sound was. And it may turn out it was just a car backfiring. It may turn out, but before I know what happens, my body reacts with the jerk reaction immediately. And then later I realize, oh, wait, maybe that wasn't a gunshot that just happened. Maybe it was. And that my brain kicks in and I start thinking again. But that adrenaline survival system that reacts so fast is a really good survival technique. It's just that it doesn't work if we're debating somebody. If we're, one of the comments is the more angry we get, the more upset, the more reactive we get, the stupider we get, because our brain isn't really functioning at full capacity. Something else is happening in the midst. Jeannie, were you going to add a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation that on the topic of being in community and listening to each other, I think that what happens, especially in Christian community groups, is you surround yourself with people who think just like you do. And so you don't learn how to listen to another viewpoint, and you get stuck. We get stuck. We don't even think any other thoughts. And we don't trust someone else who does not think the way we do, and we're not open to listening to them.
Yeah, it takes some strong intentionality to listen to opposing views, somebody that to hang in there and keep growing the relationship and care about the other person. When Jesus says, love your enemies, I don't think he was talking about somebody that lives on the other side of the globe. I think he's talking about the next door neighbor or the person that lives in the room right next door to me that irritates me and just can get to me. And yet, how do I learn to love that person and hang in on the relationship and be willing to stay in that humble place of understanding their view is that different from mine?
Yeah.
Janet.
I agree with Jeannie about the danger of, being in a bubble where everybody believes what you do, but I don't see that in Christianity today. I see two kinds of Christians out there. My sister's a Christian and I'm a Christian, and we are two different kinds of Christians. And I see that a lot these days,
I actually would agree with that. And that's very sad that those two groups of Christians are not talking to each other. And that's a large part of what our problem is right now.
Yeah, I think where part of what this book is talking about is politics. And politics has been more divisive to the Christian community over these last 10 years because each side comes to this conclusion: my Christianity informs my political belief. How can you not vote the way that I'm voting? Because obviously I'm voting as a Christian, and both sides are righteous in their understanding. They don't see it as opinions that differ. They think we're taking a stand for truth. We're standing for God. We're doing the right thing. Why would you not agree with me on this? So it's a classic place where we have to really keep working at it to stay engaged. Cody.
Yeah, I was gonna say a couple things. One of the saddest things I think about that in the different types of Christianity, I think there's actually more than two, but the saddest part is that because those different types of Christianity aren't talking to each other, there's no opportunity to see the common ground. And I think about Janet, using your example, me and my brother, we're very, there are things about our politics that are very, very different. But there's also things about our politics that are similar. We often debate, and we're often not in agreement on certain key things, but we are in agreement as far as our faith goes. And so we're always able to circle back to that. We're always able to circle back to the majors of our beliefs and the fact that we're both Jesus followers, and everything else just becomes a conversation. And sometimes it's a heated conversation, but because we talk to each other, because we believe the best in one another, we're able to find that common ground. So my hope is that Christians can get there again with each other. Then the other thing is talking about community, and the call to choose community instead. I think one of the biggest problems right now that we're all facing, we may have talked about this already, but we're all lacking community. So it's no wonder that we're seeing such a rise in division and moral differences and arguing and debates and political schisms. We're all lacking community. We're not in community with, a lot of us aren't even in community with people we agree with, let alone people we don't agree with. And so, I don't know, it's just an observation of our time. And it helps me to keep that in mind. Like, a lot of these people are lacking community. This is the way that they're choosing to connect with people right now. And it's an unhealthy way. So how can I come in there with health and grace and understanding?
I perhaps have a positive story, which I did not recognize, even though I was central to it on the wrong side. I was at another church and trying to establish a contemporary worship. It's back to the music types and stuff. And one of the elders on who was part of worship and music, came out and said, guitars do not belong in church. That is not part of worship. However, he went ahead and actually supported and helped us put together a contemporary service. He actually even came and visited and watched it a few times, so clearly he knew what he had was an opinion, and he was willing to support other people's opinions while sharing his, but still supporting what they were doing. And I didn't recognize at the time. I thought, oh, well, maybe that's just where they are, and didn't think too much of it, other than I was surprised when he came and visited and continued to support it, even though I clearly knew what his position of it was. And it wasn't until much later realized that, he had done some remarkable things, both for me and for that church, in order to allow that to happen and support it, not just say, okay, go ahead. But his opinion was against it, but he saw that it was perhaps good and went ahead and not only, didn't stop it, but actually also supported it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that ability to do that. Larry, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, a few years ago, I was privileged to be a member of the board of directors at a church in the Midwest. And it was a large campus, and on campus there was a school of ministry. And this very subject came up about, that is Christian music or not. The more contemporary was being offered more often in the sanctuary. And several of the older participants raised voice to that. So as a board, we sat down and said, we have a lower auditorium that seats about 500, and we have the larger sanctuary that's most considerably 3-4 times larger. And so we set up 2 worship services at the same time, so that, but the community hall would get together after the service. Well, this experiment really led to some interesting conclusions. After 3 or 4 months, people were yearning so much for that community that was lacking. The people in the more contemporary service were missing those that were in the more traditional hymns and soloists, and vice versa. And after just 4 months, we took a vote, and the entire congregation said, let's rejoin the congregation. And so it was an interesting play, but I don't know. And I like that, because as a microcosm of what our society is doing right now politically, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could say, okay, all of those on the left over here, all of those on the right over here, play your game for a little bit, and then let's come back and be one nation again. Let's be Americans first. And you hear that from both sides right now. It's like, can't we please put down the red and blue flags and stop divisive language? And wouldn't that be wonderful if that could occur in that church setting? When we came back into one congregation, it was really a joyous celebration, and it maintained a level of appreciation for, I believe, years to come. Now, only about 2 years after that, Karen and I retired to Florida, so I didn't get to see the long-term effects. But as we've gone back and visited with them, it's still such a loving congregation, and you see both types. You see the soloists, and you hear some of the hymns, but you also hear they have a 5-piece band: guitars, drums, piano, organ, and is really joyful. So you can have it both ways. Maybe not politically, though.
Yeah, here's what I think that story reminds us. The truth is, we need each other. I think our defiant Americanist, individualist attitudes really do think, I don't need you in my life. If you're going to interact that way, if you hold those beliefs, if you have that attitude, if you vote that way, whatever, we are quick to trash others and throw them away and say, fine, I'm going to move on. I don't need you in my life. And the reality is, all of us need even the irritating personalities in our life, even the strong personalities that we disagree with. That is healthy for us to live in that complexity and that curiosity and that humility that understands I'm not always right. And I need to hear other viewpoints, and I need refining in my life, and iron sharpens iron. And that's good for us to sharpen each other and to listen to each other and understand. If we buy into the idea, I actually need these other voices, then I think we get to healthier places. As long as I keep telling myself, I don't need this, I don't need to hear that, I don't need them in my life, then I lose something. I isolate myself. And, scripturally, part of what heaven is all about is a gathering of diverse people who actually understand to love each other without sin any longer being part of the process. What would that look like? Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor even imagined what God has for us. Imagine relationships that have that level of curiosity and diversity and appreciation for each other. C.S. Lewis once wrote and said, if I could get to know that other person the way God knows that person, the image of God, I would be sorely tempted to bow down and worship them. I mean, think about that for a moment. He called it the weight of glory, that each individual has that level of weight of glory that God has planted in them, and yet we don't treat each other with that level of weight of glory. So whether it's Janet with a sister, or Cody with a brother, or me with a father-in-law, we start with this close to home place of, I need differences around me, and I need to find a way to listen to people with whom I know I'm going to disagree, but I'm glad that they're in my life. I'm glad that God has brought us together. So that's part of what I think this book is taking us toward. And part of the value of reading it together is recognizing we're different people, and that's good. We learn from each other. Anybody else have any thoughts for the first couple chapters of this book? Because chapter 3, he's going to move us more into the rider and the elephant imagery, and kind of let's tease that out some more and explore what that means. Comments or thoughts?
I have a little something that's been on my mind mainly the last 24 hours. My sister-in-law tends to be way more progressive than I am. And when all the riots and all were going on last year, tended to be on the side of defunding the police and that kind of thing. Well, she had an experience as a very good family friend of hers, very close, was a police officer, early 40s, that had a freak car accident last week and passed away. And she and her kids went to, and her wife went to the memorial service for this, for the police officer that was their friend and family. And she went on and on and on about how amazing it was, the brotherhood of these police officers and the people on the officers dressed in their uniforms, even the firemen in their uniforms, and people saluting. Kind of remind you of the OJ when they were driving, but it was saluting this person. And she said, you know, this last call they do is a tradition for them. And the words that she said that really struck me were, "I had no idea." So I write back, text, this is all texting, and I write back, it's like a little group text. "Wow, what a great experience. I'm so thankful that everyone showed that family so much respect. Wow, and so sorry for your loss and for the family's loss." And then I almost said, "Despite what some people say, all police aren't bad," or something of that nature. And every time I looked at my "despite," I kept erasing it. "Oh, I know." Kind of what you said, Bruce, does this build bridges and that kind of thing. I left that out. And I thought, you know what? The fact that she said "I had no idea" is coming a long way. And then I kept thinking, wow, if we just spent some time in other people's shoes and get their point of view, wow, wouldn't that be a real transforming experience? So what I've done in the last 24 hours is say, well, the reverse should be true too. I need to think more about the people that rioted about defunding the police and their experience. Why do they feel so strongly that way? And I've been praying a lot about it. And I think this book study and some other things that we're working on has really opened my mind to those kinds of things. And I'm just so, I thank God after I got rid of "despite" and I hit send and I never said another word about it. I thank God that, wow, even an old man can learn new tricks. So that was a really good experience for me. Thank you all for listening.
Awesome, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Hey, Ryan, wrap us up.
I have so many thoughts still, though. Bob, thank you for that. I think earlier on, one of the pings of this conversation about how Jonathan Haidt is saying, look, like, just going back to the metaphor of the rider and the elephant, and we're all carrying those within us. Elephants tend to be, sure, strong, they're smart, but they're also very passionate and tend to stomp things that they disagree with, right? Oftentimes in Christian culture and in the church, we have been raised that it's more important to correct than connect, right? It's more important to have the right doctrine over and above all things, because love is more difficult to teach on. So let me teach you what right behavior is, right? And so it is easy for people to come across that. And I'm interested to see where he goes, because the next 2 chapters, he says, are going to be about how do we need to connect with people's elephants. Like how do we do that? It's you don't go for the rider, you go for the elephant first. And actually, Bruce, it reminded me of a way the connection, the importance of connecting with another human over correcting another human. It actually reminded me years ago of where, Bruce, we were all in a church, and I had some middle schoolers that after reading through the Gospels, they wanted to get baptized. Jeannie, you're very familiar with this story too, because I would go to Jeannie and like all these times. You have to know, for years, the catalyst of creativity was Jeannie within this church. And Bruce was the supporter of creativity. And then Jeannie would give other creators like Cody and I opportunities to join the weird creative teams that upset the correctors, right? But in this moment, there were students that wanted to get baptized, that had been sprinkled, had been baptized as babies. I went to Bruce. I'm like, here we have some kids that are 11 through 13, that age demographic, that actually out of their elephant, right? Out of their passionate, reflexive hearing of Jesus giving his life for them, and now they want to get baptized because Jesus said it, right? And yet we were in a context that said, no, just teach them the correct theology, rather than baptizing them again. Just teach them what it meant for them as babies, before they were conscious, right? I went to Bruce. Bruce had one phrase. Do you remember this, Bruce? Do you remember what you told me? No? Okay, so this is awesome. Here was your phrase. Ryan, puppy love is real for the puppy. At first, it was one of those Yoda moments where you go, I don't know what you're talking about. But the greatest response that Bruce did is he said, in this moment, what we want to support is a heart that is responding out of love for God, that may not understand Reformed theology, but the worst thing that we could do is crush them with theology right now, because puppy love is real for the puppy. So let us connect with their elephant. Let us connect with the passion that's drawing them, and let us bring them to the right place without, actually, this was totally like anti-systematic of Bruce too, which is why we loved working with Bruce. And, but it was such a good way of dealing with it, Bruce. And it may have broken some rider rules, but it connected with the true heart of the human that was before us. And that's what I'm excited to continue to get from this book is connecting with the true heart of every human that's before us, every human that, whether they're red or blue or black or white or whatever other label we want to put on them, they do have the very fingerprint of God upon their soul. And it may come out as a stomping elephant, but deep inside there is a heart that we are called to love, right? Before we correct.
Did you baptize
Those are my
them?
thoughts.
Did you end up baptizing them?
Yes.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
And it was immersion too, not
It
sprinkling.
was. And thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Bruce. And like, honestly, that was probably that was what I was so proud to be a part of, that team that would break rules for the right reason of a heart of love. And you guys definitely continued to bring out and foster the rebel within me, and thank you for that. So
Well, hey,
that's
everybody, thank you all for this time today.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you all for being a part of it. We will meet again. The date will be in the email because I can't remember it offhand right now. I think it's March 14th, March something. In 2 weeks will be chapters 3 and 4. Continue in those emails. There is always a little button that says ask Bruce or Ryan any questions. That can be a dialogue place during the 2 weeks. So shoot us a message, and then that'll spark an email probably going out to you guys to reflect some maybe paragraphs or passages that you read that really impact your heart in the next 2 weeks. We thank God for you, and we are excited about the journey for all of us to develop more righteous minds.
Thank you, everyone. Had a great time.